everyone. Today we have our another new episode, and we will discuss on the community infrastructure need and desire update. World Talent Economy Forum collaborate with Reduction Tech, and we are taking many interesting projects. And most important thing is that World Talent Economy Forum working for emerging economy and what Viva actually innovate, which is very very important for the emerging economy, like country like Bangladesh, India, Maldives, Indonesia. Many country has climate change oriented problem. Even 30% of our land we will lose only because of this climate change. So hard technology can save our country. So that's why we are collaborate with Reduction Tech, and we need lot of support because we need this technology come to the front line, and she can help millions of people from the global communities. So I request all of our friends, our government agency, corporations, and academy, those who want to invest, you can invest in Reduction Tech. Those who want to collaborate, you can do collaborate with her. I'm sure she will be happy to work as a keynote speaker or lecturer for the university and for the conference. Already we invite her as a keynote speaker for Nikola Tesla Technology Conference. So in July, she will attend in the big conference. So hopefully from today's sessions, our community can learn very interesting things. And I request all of the community, please support Reduction Tech. Professor Viva, what you want to add for today's session?
I want to tell people that our chemistry of advanced oxidation for the atmosphere is still a little ahead of its time. I've been trying to connect with government chemists in Canada, and they still have trouble with some of the aspects of it. So we're dealing with removing barriers to getting up and running all the time, even in progressive Canada. So I just want people to know that. As far as the infrastructure, there are two ways that I wanted to talk about the infrastructure today. One is when I was on Facebook, I've encountered quite a lot of people from the emerging economies who are struggling deeply with the financial issues around adapting to climate change. And they're looking for, help in financing different adaptation and expansion projects. And there's really no vehicle for that. So one of the things we've done is we've become a founding corporate sponsor for a charity that will enable high net worth people to get a tax shelter for investing in some of these projects, which we're going to highlight. So there's a huge need for that that's not being addressed with some kind of interim opportunity for high net worth people to invest and have some benefit for them as well too. So we just registered the charity number for that and are following up with more of that work today as well too. But we're going to do that at the same time as well. The infrastructure for helping the emerging economy stabilize itself is not as in place as people would like to think. It's actually clearly missing in a lot of different ways. I know that the UN World Food Program, for example, is advertising on Facebook, and they're saying, that they're behind on being able to feed everyone because not enough donations are coming in. So there needs to be more movement and outreach towards the high net worth people around the world. And we're going to try and work on doing that as well too, because let's face it, Forbes magazine about 3 weeks ago came out with some figures, and I looked at the figures for how much of a carbon footprint the high net worth people have with their wealth. And it's basically for every $1 million of wealth, 148 tons of carbon was emitted. So that's either net worth or net income. So we're going to help. We're going to try to help the wealth lower its carbon footprint by providing opportunities in emerging nations to invest and give a tax shelter to the high net worth individuals whenever we can. So that's what we're working on, in addition to the carbon removal technology as well too. So it's a two-pronged effort. So do you have any comment there, Sharif, on that? Sharif?
Yes.
Yeah, do you have any comment about that?
No, like if you have a specific presentation for the community infrastructure needs, maybe we have many infrastructure development community, they can learn from your presentation.
Yeah, so what we're doing while we're talking to everyone in the communities that are talking to us and asking for project funding is we're getting details on what their needs are to scale up. And a lot of the needs are quite basic. We're looking at basic healthcare, basic education, computers, different kinds of books, including religious books, so that a lot of these communities have religious groups that are also combining with other teaching as well too. So there's a very holistic thing happening at these smaller community levels. And it's nowhere near as high tech as what is happening when we have David Smith and your other panelists on the panel talking about the metaverse and AI and this type of thing. There's a huge gap between what is happening with the emerging economies and what they need. It's much more basic. So one of the things that's going to happen with all the tech that is discussed on the panel, Sharif, is that the emerging economies are going to leapfrog, but only when they're capable of leapfrogging in the future to, certain aspects of the technology. As far as specific infrastructure, it really boils down to computers, still food and water, and a lot of the groups that are getting a hold of us are doing permaculture. So they want to add permaculture in. Hi, David.
Hey, how are you?
Good, thanks. Yeah, so they want to add permaculture in aggressively in the emerging economies as well too, which requires a significant amount of seeds and landscaping and that type of thing that they're willing to do the work on. So that's the kind of infrastructure that we see being needed right now on the front lines of the charity.
Yes. Professor David Smith, we are discussing on community infrastructure needs and desire update. We actually sent email regarding today's session. Very special episode with Viva. So what you want to add? What you want to advise, especially for this emerging economy?
Or if you begin to look at community infrastructure, and Viva is correct in how she was beginning to structure it, that there's just so many different nuances because it really is the framework that is set in place, and it's the framework to support really the entire community of people living, of people working, of looking at different ways to do it. Some of the challenges we have today are, how do we fund this type of community infrastructure? How do we begin to make it sustainable? How do we begin to pull the elements together? It's real interesting to me because, Sharif, as you know, I've been attending South by Southwest this week and part of last week. And there's so much going on about sustainability here. And about how do you create a smart approach that can balance all the different demands of all the different stakeholders. And see, that's what is often missing, is how do you balance the demands of the various stakeholders. We've hit when Talif Graffi speaks, he talks about how you need to make sure that the average citizens are involved. How do you educate them so that they know, for example, there's a sustainability issue? And it's the same thing when you look at community infrastructure, because oftentimes community infrastructure is paid for out of taxes and fees and other things that the common citizens pay. And many, many times they do not understand the needs to create some of the more advanced community infrastructure, to create a community infrastructure that is sustainable, that is green, that helps impact the environmental concerns and things that people have. Um, and so that is one of the issues you really have with this, because you're talking about the needs and desires, and where most communities fail, most governments fail, is that they do a very poor job of communicating why and what's it for, and why spending, in many instances, extra money is beneficial to helping save the community, save the nation, save the world. Uh,
Mhm.
and and that is one of the biggest challenges you see. And Dr. Sleeve addresses that so well when he talks. And yesterday I was speaking on a panel about international innovation and the startup journey. And this same topic came out there as we looked at how developing nations, and actually even international developed nations, have to struggle, and balancing the culture and the education and gain a consensus understanding of what's important and why you need to do things in different ways, why regulations need to be met that are not just your own local regulations, but others around the world are common, not just when we look at community infrastructure, but even things like how to help developing nations grow their ecosystems, how to help developing nations grow their entrepreneur capabilities, increase their GDP, and other things. All of these are tied together, and community infrastructure is one of the ways where governments can really work to create more jobs for the people in the country, in the city, in the state nation, to create more opportunities to pave the way for enhanced services, enhanced manufacturing, enhanced distribution, maybe new services, maybe enhanced tourism and other things like that. So it's one where there's a tremendous impact, but it's also one where most, and I'm not going to even use the word, it's the place where all governments fail to properly educate the people about why this type of infrastructure is needed and why it's important and why they should support it. So Sharif, I think that's my initial comments.
Okay.
Thank
Can
you.
I add some more to that?
Yes.
One of the things that we had a look at with what is going on in the emerging economy, people that are talking to us, is we clearly see that they basically only have a carbon footprint of about 2.5 tons a year per person. So the carbon footprint has a lot of wiggle room for them, and they, in combination with that, need a lift still out of poverty. And we actually did an evaluation that we think that, between 2.5 tons and 6 tons of increased wealth, which is basically what a carbon footprint is somewhat of a reflection of wealth. So there is wiggle room that these emerging economies have in terms of investment to both lift them out of poverty and get the right infrastructure started for them holistically as well too. So to what we are looking at setting a limit of about 6 tons per person average carbon footprint. So that means that if they got computers, there would be an average per capita increase in the carbon footprint of the community, this type of thing. So we're going to keep track of what the carbon footprint is doing, and we're going to ask the high net worth people to meet us halfway on reducing their emissions by making a tax deductible, tax sheltered investment into the economies. So we think this might be a good vehicle for a lot of discretionary ability from high net worth people who are very interested in seeing the right kind of development go in, and also, incentivizing them at the same time as much as humanly possible. Because again, like David said, the governments are falling short on their explanation, teaching, and communications, both to their community and for advocacy on behalf of the community. We know that the climate issue is a big bone of contention, and we need to grease the wheels as much as possible between where there's discretionary income and making that incentivized so that it can move into the emerging economies. And they're already quite sustainable when a person is only emitting 2.5 tons per capita. And, like we said, up to 6 tons per capita, that's pretty sustainable. So, yeah, that's my additional comment, Sharif.
Thank you. Professor David Smith.
It 100% correct there. And, if you begin to look at the whole area of community infrastructure from a pure economics structure, it really has an impact that's broader than just how it supports the lives and stuff too. It's because it really is a foundation that supports economic development, and the investments in infrastructure lay the groundwork for not just improving the community facilities and structures, but also they are part of the pipeline that supports economic growth, and can go ahead and push that, because they let you begin to look at how to have a way to utilize the resources to work with a portfolio of competencies and capabilities that are there. It can be replacing a bridge, it could be retrofitting a facility for business, it could be installing new electrical systems, it can be upgrading and diversifying the type of energy or communication systems that are used. And the community infrastructure really needs to improve the overall basic infrastructure, but on the other hand, it also needs to position to help position the community, the areas, for new businesses and to expand the businesses. Like I said earlier, the infrastructure improvement projects really themselves create jobs and create economics going, but they also will attract investment. They'll stimulate commerce, and they will support the local businesses, the local universities, the local governments, and ultimately they will all create more jobs there. And there's a lot of ways to stimulate a community infrastructure from the government and from other private operations too. If you begin to look at what USAID and the International Business Development Bank and the World Bank, the UN, and quite a few other organizations, and particularly a lot of the NGOs, they fund projects really looking at how to upgrade the infrastructure, particularly in developing nations. And so even these large funding groups recognize the importance. And they also recognize that many, particularly in developing nations, there is not an adequate tax base, not an adequate fee base inside the countries to support uh, the cost of a lot of the community infrastructure, particularly community infrastructure that is trying to look at sustainability. That's why at the last United Nations COPs, a special outcome of that was that the United Nations and the partnerships they've put together are explicitly targeting money to be able to deal with sustainability and sustainability projects and community infrastructure projects for sustainability out of funds which were allocated for that, not for the developing nations, but these were explicitly targeted for the developing nations. And you know, these are the type of things that we have talked about before. One of the biggest challenges besides education in looking at sustainability is what I do in my own backyard doesn't affect my city. What I do in my city does not necessarily affect my region enough. It What I do in my region might not make a big impact in my country. My country might not make a big enough impact on the world. All of them have to have action. If I do something just in my own backyard, it's going to do very little to address the world's problems. But you've got to have action across all of those to do it. And infrastructure projects that can be made sustainable enough to help address it can be duplicated all around the world. And that is one of the places where infrastructure has an advantage over some of the other approaches is all regions require infrastructure, all cities require infrastructure, all rural parts of the world require infrastructure. And it's one place that we can begin to work globally to help increase the sustainability.
Mhm. Definitely, I agree 100%. So the other thing that I've noticed is that there seems to be quite a strong move to permaculture as a solution for the agricultural infrastructure and also sustainable agriculture as well too. Now, the problem is that the communities still aren't quite stable enough, and it's like a forest where you have young trees and there's a certain number of years that the forest needs to be watched carefully and invested in carefully before the trees are free to grow. There's a certain threshold of stability that is still not happening widely in the emerging economies, in the rural areas in particular. And at the same time that they're trying to stabilize, they're also dealing with climate consequences. So they have drought, they have fire, they have increased rain bombs and monsoons that they're more exposed to. So while they're trying to stabilize, at the same time, they have the climate infrastructure that needs to be looked at. So I just briefly want to talk about the climate situation from the perspective of a couple of the things that are happening in the atmosphere, which is infrastructure, and it is impacting these most vulnerable nations. And that is that Australia had forest fires in 2020 that damaged the ozone layer by 10%. And recently, again, with respect to the ozone layer, which is very important in terms of filtering the right kind of light frequencies for plant growth and filtering out cancer-causing UVB radiation. The other thing that happened with the ozone layer is they found that the satellite traffic up there is now damaging the ozone layer, because when they disintegrate, they give off all sorts of different elements and compounds and resin residues and volatile organic compounds. So that it has now been published in the peer-reviewed literature. So globally, the infrastructure is still struggling, while NASA, over the last year came out and said that the ozone layer would be healed by 2066. This is actually probably not the case now with these emerging outcomes happening that I just mentioned. Also, with respect to the hydroxyl layer, which is another key infrastructure, an article came out in Google yesterday that scientists are now cautioning everyone that hydrogen fuel can only be included in the fuel mix to a certain level, because there's slippage or leakage when you harvest hydrogen from methane. And also when you use hydrogen as a fuel, they've set a limit of 9% leakage, which is fairly high. Usually it's only about 3%. But the reason that they're talking about it is that the hydroxyl is also depleted when there's hydrogen leaking in the atmosphere. So this layer is getting really hit from every angle, and its job is to actually pretty much cover everything in the atmosphere at the same time. So this infrastructure is not stable from a global perspective anywhere on the planet. And this is something we're all involved in. It doesn't matter what nation we're from anywhere anymore. And, this is why my company is working on the hydroxyl layer specifically. So, these are basically infrastructure items. And one of the sayings that we have is local pollution is global pollution, because the atmosphere is one medium. So pretty much what David said, I agree with. What you ultimately do have going on in your backyard does contribute to the global situation. So, it does matter across the board, from micro issues all the way up to big macro issues, what we're doing. And, obviously the developed nations are trying to do as much systems change as possible. And, the high net worth leaders around the world are grappling with the ways and means of getting this done, because they obviously do care.
Thank you. Professor David Smith.
The impact, though, of the community infrastructure is from the backyard going out across the macro and others, and really has to be tackled that way. And you brought up a very important part as you look at, for example, natural disasters as part of that. And you see those in many different ways. And most people, when you say community infrastructure, you think of things like water and sewage and roads, but it goes beyond that. It includes things like public transportation, facilities to support bicycles and other things like that. It includes ways to not have flooding and others. It includes education facilities, medical facilities, sport recreation facilities, and in open spaces, public parks, trees, and things like that are a part of the community infrastructure and how it can be used. And increasingly today, the digital networks, so broadband infrastructures and things are part of the community infrastructure, and we have to think broadly like that. But she brought up a great example of natural disasters. I can tell you here in the United States, natural disasters have cost the United States over $2 trillion since 1980. And, it's inevitable that natural disasters are going to impact a population. It's going to impact the infrastructure. It's going to impact the the people, the homes, the first responders, and the citizens there. And we need to see today, and particularly since we see climate changes making some of these natural disasters more common right now, we need to look at how we can put not only innovative technologies in place, but also innovative processes and innovative regulations in place to support the response and recoverable efforts. And how do we not only enable um, a more resilient future, but how do we also, when we're recovering and doing things like this, how do we leapfrog and put a more sustainable future in place? And, we need to look and across the world begin to look at how, not through these the developments of new technologies, new processes, we need to research the critical topic areas. We need to really globally begin to identify and deploy the best practices across not just government at all levels, not just private and commercial organizations, but how do we reach out to the community? And how do we, uh, as we look at the whole infrastructure, community infrastructure needs, how do we make sure that the infrastructure is resilient? And how can we also collect and really monitor key threats and improve the ability to share this across the world? And I really think that is one of the places where we have to begin to do it. And the other is, and again, I'm trying to filter a little bit more for the developing communities as well, is that this type of community infrastructure needs to happen also in the rural areas as well as the urban areas, so that the rural areas can not only enjoy the same quality of life and services, but that they can participate and understand the importance of the sustainability as we look at it. Because the rural communities also need to attract and retain the businesses that are there to support the people living in the rural area, to provide the employment, the services for those, and can help provide the, again, not just the basic infrastructures, but healthcare, education, public safety, other services that are there necessary for it. Because one of the interesting statistics when you look at the rural environments globally is that the rural environment is made up with a higher percentage of older people than you have in the urban environment. And so even the need for infrastructure changes as you look at the demographics of what type of community infrastructure is needed in the rural environment versus the urban environments too. And so, Sharif, I know you smile sometimes when I say this, but things like community infrastructure is not just a single piece, it's part of a more complex system of systems. And it's a global systems of systems that you have to begin to understand how to address the whole ecosystem of it. And again, you have to address it not just on the local level, but on the global level to be effective. And it's a very complex problem. It's a
Mm.
very complex set of solutions that need to be. And it's not one size fits all. I can tell you, in one of the developing nations that I have done some work with in the last 2 years, one of the big solutions there was we helped them establish biomass plants. And it was biomass not only to generate power, but it was to generate, for example, one of the byproducts of this biomass plant is fertilizer. And another byproduct of the biomass plant was fortified materials that could go and replenish uh, soil that had been eroded. So it generated both soil and fertilizer. It,
Permaculture.
yeah, well, and this was a biomass plant there too,
Mm.
but also it generated heat as part of the biomass process that was siphoned off and was used to create a manufacturing plant that could use the heat next to the biomass plant. It used biomass from small farms. The average people on the farms, and this was in Haiti, is 2.5 people. And many times, one person, these are small farms, one person did the farming and the other one was at home not doing anything. This actually helped create a job for the other person there to help go in and sell their materials into the biomass plant. It helped create a job that let them go and take some of the output and do it. So it created new income, new jobs for people, uh, all from putting in a biomass plant to meet some of the infrastructure needs, but then you had all these peripheral benefits from it as well. And that is one of the places where we need to become smarter. We need to begin to look at how can we do things which have not just one impact, but can be leveraged to create multiple impacts, and particularly in areas that improve the economic development, that improve the safety, the welfare of the communities, and as well as the sustainability. Uh,
Mhm.
though, if you can begin to do projects like that, the education for the citizens to support a community infrastructure becomes much stronger.
Mhm.
And I'm just building this because it needs to be built. And where you
Mhm.
can pull them in and they become part of the solution, they receive benefits that they understand. So it's both tangible benefits and intangible benefits. And intangible benefits are as important as the tangible benefits as well. Because if we look at ourselves, I would bet you our greatest successes and failures in our lives have been because of intangibles more than tangibles. It's the same thing when you try to look at how to get people to just support community infrastructure, particularly when you're trying to go to higher goals like global sustainability and to meet the COP's targets and things too, Sri. So I hope this uh, description helps phase it a little bit more of how we can look at a successful partnership among all the stakeholders to implement community infrastructure.
Okay, that's really
Very
good.
well.
Thanks a lot. I think we're getting close to concluding remarks, but I just wanted to mention that one of the communities that we have learned about is the refugee camps. Okay, so we have probably half a dozen of them that are fairly long term, that are still living in tents, but exactly what David Smith has said has happened there. There have been some enterprising leaders within the camps that have had enough stability that what they could do is start importing skills in and teaching skilling into the refugee camps. So, for example, there's a couple of areas: women's empowerment, and one of the skills they're teaching, which is very basic, unfortunately, this is where they're at, is soap making. Okay, so they're also teaching all kinds of other skills that they can look after each other, like cutting hair, hairdressing, different self-care skills. They're getting all of those skills in place. And that's because those particular refugee camps have had enough long-term funding in place that they're stable enough that some of the innovation and some of these intangibles that are needed in a community for all the right reasons, as David mentioned, will happen. And so taking one of the more advanced refugee camps that we have talking to us, what they're adding to that at the same time, they're doing everything they can all at once. And they're adding permaculture teaching as well. And so they're documenting it. They're campaigning for funding at the same time. And like I said before, they just need vehicles to have discretionary funds come in and help them out and bring them from, these are people that have a carbon footprint that's less than 2.5 tons per capita. And so there's lots of wiggle room in terms of sustainability and just getting them stabilized and getting them up onto more of the projects that, connect them into their own environment and their own economy and stabilize them while getting ready to leapfrog in the more advanced technology, the more advanced infrastructure capabilities that, of course, will have had enough scrutiny that those will also be highly sustainable for those people as well.
Professor David Smith.
Agree, 100%. The whole area of infrastructure is one that, I hate to say it, we can't live without today. And as we've talked so far in the program, we see that infrastructure has so many different levels on it. And, in the conference, one of the sessions that I was attending, actually talking about infrastructure, said it's really like the blood veins we have in our body. No, it's not just the blood veins, they said, it's also our nerve system, because we need to have not only the blood flow, but we need to have the intellect flow,
Yeah.
which is part of what our nerve system does. And it's not just the blood flowing in your body and the nerve system there. You've got to have the muscle structure around them that can support what they are doing. And infrastructure is that. It's all of those coming together to support us as a human functioning, but it's the same thing for a community. It's the same thing for a region, a country, the world, to begin to do it. And that's kind of the philosophy I think you have to take as you look at infrastructure and how infrastructure can be put on place. Of course, there's going to be unique needs for infrastructure. I can totally understand that some of the infrastructure in Africa is going to be different than the infrastructure in China, which is going to be different than the infrastructure in Australia or in Brazil or in the United States or in Canada. And we see that. I mean, a great example is something that I see here in Texas all the time. In Canada, your infrastructure is optimized for cold weather. I'm sometimes over 100 degrees for multiple days in the summer. Your infrastructure would die in that type of weather. My infrastructure dies if I'm below freezing for many days in a row, much less get down to the teens or, heaven forbid, below zero here. And so infrastructure is not one size fits all. You have to begin to understand the local requirements for infrastructure as well. I mean, I can tell you our houses here have tiny heaters compared to what you see in Canada. And we have much more efficient air conditioning systems in here, where I'm surprised when I've traveled across Canada and others, many homes don't have air conditioning. And I can tell you here, people would die in Texas if we didn't have air conditioning today. And you have to think about that as a way to structure how you look at infrastructure and how it can be applied. The medical systems, which is community infrastructure, is different. You have to understand those differences too, but there's commonalities among it, and particularly when we look at sustainability. I spoke earlier about the biomass plant in Haiti. Well, if I was to do a biomass plant in Canada, it would have some similar characteristics, but it would be different again there too, because the biomasses I'm putting in are different. If I did a biomass plant based on algae, much different than what we did as we looked at agricultural crops and things, and algae is a great one. The other comment I want to make, kind of as we're beginning to wrap up a little bit, is we were always talking about hydrogen. And hydrogen is one where we see promises in a lot of different areas, but as she noted, and I've talked about in presentations before, one of the challenges with hydrogen is our infrastructure doesn't support the transit of hydrogen because the size of the atoms are very, very small and they're very active. And so you cannot really do large pipelines of supplying hydrogen. But hydrogen is one where I particularly think it's going to be part of the future of vehicles. As you've heard me say before, I think electric vehicles are a transient technology to get us to something like a hydrogen vehicle, which byproduct is water, as opposed to greenhouse gases and things. But the infrastructure doesn't support it. So we have to look either at ways to improve the infrastructure or go to things like point of use generation. And I think we're going to see the same thing with power. We're going to increasingly go more and more where we do point of use power generation as an infrastructure tool with mini and microgrids, as opposed to large power plants where you lose half the energy by the transmission lines.
Mhm.
And
And
it
of
becomes
course,
not
emerging economies are a perfect place to actually pilot those microgrids.
Yeah, in hybrid microgrids, so that you can
Mhm.
have multiple ways to produce the energy. And in those same microgrids, they can support a digital infrastructure of access to the internet and other types of services. And it can be supported both terrestrial, uh, in the air, and through space as well. So again, if particularly in developing nations, there's many ways to do this, and a mini micro type grid is a way to think about community infrastructures too, and be able to build and expand it that way. And again, there are funds available through joint development projects, public-private partnerships, NGOs like International Development Bank, World Bank, others like that, to help fund these type of initiatives in developing nation.
The only thing
And
I would add there, David, is one of the calls that's come very clear through the COP meetings is that the capital for, scaling up solutions and infrastructure and sustainability and loss and damage compensation all rolled into one for the vulnerable economies is that capital needs to be a little more affordable. So someone like Al Gore, who's a very beloved figure in climate change, has come out and encouraging the capital markets to make their capital a little more affordable to the emerging economies for that reason.
No, I agree. While I do not necessarily agree with all of Al Gore
Hmm.
and what he has done in things, particularly some of the credit he's taken for things which he did not do. Uh, the concept there is very strong, and thing is that we have to do these together. And one of the premises, Dr. Shreve, that I will just throw on the table as we kind of talk this through on this last part is one of the things that has inhibited effective climate actions in many countries I've observed around the world, and more in developing, I mean, sorry, more in developed nations than developing nations, but even in developing nations, is the role of politics. And in some of this, we need to understand that we have to do global uh, initiatives to put sustainability on the table. And oftentimes, those have to rise above partisan politics.
Hmm.
And it's really hard to do, but it's necessary if we are going to meet, for example, the COP's targets that were set out in the Paris Accord and others. We've got to begin to look at ways to do that. Uh, if you want to talk about a wicked problem, and Sharif, I'm a wicked problem solver. Uh, that partisan politics is a wicked problem that I just don't see any near-term solution for.
Yeah, the only thing they can try to do in these nations is get all of the infrastructure items around climate change set as internal policy items rather than ad hoc policy. It needs to be governance policy. They have to actually change the nature of what they are in order to be able to govern that aspect that we're confronted with that wasn't there before. It's ad hoc is not doing it, and that combining that with left right politics or other political persuasions is leaving it too vulnerable to smaller individuals. We all have to come together as a larger block and make it a very significant permanent governance aspect of what we're doing.
You're correct.
Thank you. This is excellent discussion, Madam Viva. What's your concluding remarks for today's session?
I'd just like to quickly reiterate that the whole concept of infrastructure is now getting more and more inclusive with people. We teach that the atmosphere is one medium, so it's basically taking humanity as a single into the future with its potential disastrous or potentially wonderful outcome in our hands collectively as one group. So the globalism fears that do happen in the political arena, I think there is a way to handle it, once we understand that we do actually share one planet, one atmosphere, and that we'll be able to govern ourselves and keep our freedoms, keep our justice, keep all our positive things on the front burner as well at the same time. I don't think they're mutually exclusive. So that's really what I'd like to add.
Sharif, let me add one other
Professor
thing
David
in
Smith.
a perpendicular way. Today is International Pie Day. And if you think about the importance of pie as we look into the world and what we're doing with it, most school kids and others learn, that pi is 3.141592653, keep on going. But science is one of the things that's going to help us address these issues. Science, technology, the processes, the procedures, all of those have to come together. And, we maybe, even though we have like Daughters Days, Sundays, Pi Days, other things like that, maybe we need to look globally at how can we do a infrastructure day, a global infrastructure day on sustainability, and use it as a place to do global education to help the issues go across the community. And those are some of the things, Sharif, which I think would help. And what you're doing with the World Talent Economic Forum and the type of information you're putting out goes a way to helping us accomplish this. So thank you so much for what you do, Dr. Sharif, with these programs.
Thank you. Thank you. I want to share a very good news with our speaker, with our audience. You know that World Talent Economy Forum, we are advocating for modern science, engineering, and technology. That's why we invite Viva, David Smith, and everyone. Recently we finished one of the largest conference with Dhaka University, and that time we meet with uh, Honorable Prime Minister Chief Advisor for Business and Innovation, Mr. Salman F. Rahman, and he is vice chairman for one of the largest group of companies in Asia. It's called Beximco. So, Madam Viva, he knows about your reduction tech. Uh, Professor David Smith, he knows about your ETT and about your wicked problems solutions. And all of the speakers, those who joins in World Talent Economy Forums, these are our audience. Professor Fred Philip joined in one of the largest event conference as a keynote speakers. This July, we will organizing another biggest conference, Nikola Tesla Technology Conference. This month, we are working with Indian business ministries and ICT ministries, and we will meet the Prime Minister office. So this way, World Talent Economy Forum actually collaborate with the government agency, corporations, and academy. And we are taking action. Only with our World Talent Economy Forum, we are supporting 5 different divisions with 10 million people. So your innovations, your contributions, your your experience actually priceless for emerging economy. So how you contributing? I'm sure our people going to give you a very big returns. I want to welcome you all in Dhaka in this Nikola Tesla Technology Conference. This kind of very, very high profile people gonna join. You will get a huge media coverage, huge networks, and definitely we will organize red carpet reception for all of you. Thank you, Madam Viva, for your excellent contribution for World Talent Economy Forum. And thank you, Professor David Smith. And I request all of our speakers from around the world, please join, support our initiative. We only do not only use this dialogue, we take action. Action is the key. We are uplifting the community. We are developing projects. We are helping the communities. So if you want to take the real actions, join World Talent Economy Forum and uplift the emerging economy people. I know this is very tough, very difficult, but definitely those who work with us, they will be part of the history. Thank you. Bye-bye and take care.